From Council Chamber, before we begin, I will go over the emergency response plan for this room. In an emergency, everyone must evacuate through the nearest safe exit. Those seated in the gallery take direction from security to evacuate. Council takes direction from myself. After evacuating the room, please proceed to a stairwell. Take the stairs to ground level and evacuate the building through the doors marked emergency exit and go to the muster point. Do not take an elevator or walk through the city room. Anyone with limited mobility should identify themselves to security or the meeting clerk during an evacuation. Finally, please speak with security or the meeting clerk if you require first aid. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will call the meeting to order on April 1st, 2025. No funny stuff, please. Looking at you, councillors. Yeah, and we'll call the meeting to order with a land acknowledgement. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and the Métis homeland, and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. I'll begin with a roll call. Councillor Wright.
Good morning.
Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
And Councillor Rice.
Good morning.
And joining us in chambers, Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
And are there any councillors joining us online? I believe Councillor
Stevenson is here.
Councillor Stevenson, and did I see Councillor Rutherford?
Yep.
No.
Good morning.
Yep. Good morning, Councillor Rutherford. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda.
So I can move.
Councillor Rice.
Yep.
Any questions, additions, changes, deletions? Hearing none. Please call the vote.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Approval of the minutes, March 4th, 2025, Urban Planning Committee, and March 12th, 2025, Urban Planning Committee, non-regular. Councillor Knack?
I'll move the approval of those minutes that
Okay.
you've just listed.
Questions, edit, changes, deletions? Hearing none, please call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Excellent, thank you. Protocol items, please display the vote. Yeah, carried unanimously. Protocol items, I'm not aware of any. Anyone else? Nope, okay, thanks. So select items for debate. I will select 7.1 and 7.2, and there's no other items. So, clerk, do we require a vote on that, or? Nope. Okay, then we'll go to votes, vote on reports not selected for debate, in which there's none. So requests to speak. I have 3 speakers for item 7.2, Shree Clausen, John McKell, and Mark Wilson. Are there any others, clerk? No late arrivals? Hearing none, so there's those 3. I'll take a motion to approve on those 3 folks speaking today.
So moved.
Councillor Knack. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried unanimously. I don't see any time specific on the agenda. I'm not aware of any councillor inquiries or reports for a different meeting, reschedules, or unfinished business. So that brings us to our first item and first presentation on item 7.1. Administration, do you have a presentation?
We do.
Please begin.
Thank you. And good morning. I'm Travis Pollock, Branch Manager of Development Services. To my right, your left is Jesse Inkpin, City Solicitor, Shauna Kuiper, Director of Planning Coordination, Calvin Chan, Planner, Hanny Kwan, Director of Affordable Housing and Homelessness, and others in the gallery to answer your questions. This report presents proposed amendments to Zoning Bylaw 2001 and considerations around regulating congregate sleeping areas and shelters throughout the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. On September 10th, 2024, City Council directed administration to prepare zoning amendments to update regulations for shelters to restrict locations around heavy industrial uses and limit the maximum floor space of congregate sleeping areas within seasonal and year-round shelters in the business employment zone. Administration has prepared amendments that restrict shelters from locating locating next to a site abutting property zoned heavy industrial, which are outlined in attachment 1. In regards to limiting this shelter size for uses in the business employment zone, administration conducted an analysis of options to regulate congregate sleeping areas and has prepared additional amendments which would limit sleeping areas to 125 people. These are outlined in attachment 2. I'll pass it over to Shauna for some more detailed presentation.
Next slide, please. In Edmonton, shelters provide temporary accommodations for up to approximately 2,000 people every day. Shelters are primarily funded and their operations regulated by agreements with the Government of Alberta, Alberta Health Service requirements, and the Fire Code. There are currently no shelter-specific regulations in the zoning bylaw. Concerns around the land use and social impacts related to large-scale shelters have been identified by council and residents, leading to the direction by council to explore ways to regulate their size through the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. Administration conducted a jurisdictional review of national, provincial, and municipal standards, as well as best practice documents on shelter design to better understand how sleeping areas within shelters could be considered. Many documents discouraged the use of congregate sleeping areas, and none of the documents provided standards for regulating the size or design of congregate sleeping areas. Next slide, please. Administration undertook targeted engagement with shelter providers and the Government of Alberta around size limitations for congregate sleeping areas. Engagement explored the challenges of shelter provisions and the potential trade-offs associated with each of the 3 approaches as discussed in the report. Shelter providers stressed that their preference generally would be to provide smaller shelters with lower occupancy. However, they also recognize that the demand for spaces and limited resources prevent shelters from always operating in this manner. Shelter providers also highlighted concerns for restricting the floor area or setting an occupancy limit of congregate sleeping areas through the zoning bylaw. Either approach would limit their flexibility to accommodate their clients, especially in emergencies. They indicated that this could also further constrain their ability to find suitable locations and ensuring that beds are available when needed. Next slide, please. Many shelter operators indicated a preference to regulate occupancy limits over floor area. Occupancy limits are the most direct and clear form of regulation and provide slightly more flexibility compared to imposing limits through floor area. Administration has developed proposed zoning regulations that would limit the occupancy of congregate sleeping areas to 125 people. This limit reflects feedback from shelter providers and also ensures that most existing shelter buildings remain conforming to the zoning bylaw. To address concerns about responding to emergency situations, the proposed regulations would allow shelters to exceed the proposed capacity due to an emergency for up to 90 days. These proposed amendments are outlined in attachment 2 of the report. Next slide, please. Based on the jurisdictional scan, best practices, and concerns raised by various stakeholders, administration does not recommend regulating congregate sleeping areas. They introduce a layer of regulation for shelter providers at the municipal level that could constrain the ability of shelter operators to provide accommodations to their clients. Administration will continue to proceed to a future public hearing with the proposed amendments outlined in Attachment 1. These amendments were discussed with Council last year, and they would remove the floor area limits in the business employment zone and restrict shelters from locating on a site that abuts a property zoned heavy industrial. To proceed with the zoning bylaw text amendments to regulate the size of congregate sleeping areas as outlined in Attachment 2, a motion is required to direct administration to do so. Next slide. That concludes the presentation. We would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Would any colleagues like to ask any questions? Please chime in. I know I selected the item. Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this comprehensive work, and I think excellent suggestions coming forward. So maybe just as a starting point, you know, I am supportive of the amendments that are outlined in Attachment 2. So just want to understand, Attachment 1, that will happen regardless. Attachment 2 would be additional on top of that?
That's correct.
Great, because again, I think what's in Attachment 1 is really, really strong and very thoughtful. I think maybe just to dig in a little bit more in terms of why administration isn't recommending attachment 2. So I understand it's a layer of regulation, but I don't know why that's a bad thing when we look at sort of the best practices that recognize that larger spaces are not ideal.
So based on our review of best practices in other jurisdictions, none of them regulated or proposed regulations for congregate sleeping areas. And as well, due to the regulations or the guidances that are already in place, whether they are the best practices or the HS guidelines or the fire code, we feel that those are sufficient.
Councillor, if I could add to that, this is Hani Kwan from Affordable Housing and Homelessness. There are some other considerations, I think, for committee on this particular potential regulation. And so in the number of shelters that have opened in the last couple of years, all of them have stayed below the 125 limit already. And so our feeling is that in conversations with the Government of Alberta administration and shelter providers is that the desire for providers is already to stay within that size limit. And the other thing I think that is important is that we've been having, and this is subsequent to our conversation at Community and Public Services Committee yesterday, is that we've been having conversations about jurisdictional lines and staying in our lane. And so in the midst of a continuing homelessness crisis, it may appear counter to our conversations about jurisdiction to also then introduce a regulatory barrier to shelter spaces. So that those factors all fed into our thinking around not recommending the second option.
Yeah, and I think I just hear tension there because on the one hand, I'm hearing that there won't be any shelters that are larger than 125, but that we can't put that restriction in. So that makes me feel less confident in our confidence that we aren't going to see shelters larger than 125 congregate sleeping spaces moving forward. Could we not instead look at this as a way of aligning best practice at the provincial level, best practice in our jurisdiction, which is land use regulation? I'm not seeing those being in conflict with each other. It seems more like a really good confluence.
There's a question of equity as well in terms of what we regulate and why. And so when the zoning bylaw was being reviewed, it was determined at that time that limiting shelter size in response to the housing crisis was not necessary, and administration still stands by that.
Yeah, and I think that equity piece is an important one. I think where we do, we always want to regulate use, not user. I think what we see, and I think what you've probably heard in speaking to shelter operators themselves as well, that at a certain size, shelters do have land use impacts on surrounding properties. I think that's very visible and very apparent. So I'm not sure that we're really straying outside of that. Ms. Inkpen, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
No, I think you're correct. When we're talking about the land use impact, as you've suggested, there may be impacts the larger it gets, just like any other development gets large. Councillor.
Exactly. I did just want to understand the implications for some of our existing shelters that exceed 125. Would they become legally non-conforming? Are they in standard zones right now? I can look that up, actually. I'll stop here. I'll come back for another round, and I'll see what zone they're in, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
Unless admin has the answer at their fingertips. No. Okay. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, are they at the 120 right now because there is that floor area limit?
No, I think the selection of a site for operating a shelter it involves a number of factors, and probably the most restrictive is the availability of appropriate sites, buildings, and opportunities, because of course they're needing to find the spaces, and shelters are very specific use. So I think that's probably the most specific factor. And then operating a shelter, of course, requires the larger the shelter is, requires more resources, more staffing, and so funding, of course, is the other factor. I think those are probably the two that are limiting the sizes in particular. But also, ideally, operators have said to us that it's more suitable and ideal to operate a smaller site. You get better results that way.
Okay, but I guess where my concern is if we're removing the floor area limit and not putting restrictions on sleeping areas, rather than using that extra floor area for those wraparound services, what's to keep them from using them for sleeping areas? Or,
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
okay. If we're expanding the floor area, what is, will they expand like the sleeping areas to be more than the 125 rather than providing the wraparound services?
The proposed changes that are in attachment 2 are limiting the congregate sleeping areas to 125.
Right, but you're not recommending that.
That's correct.
So if we just open up floor area,
Then there's nothing regulating the congregate sleeping areas or the size of the shelter.
okay, that's my concern, is that we're just gonna have these mega centers without any of the support services.
I think another consideration is that, I mean, this is also going to be dependent on whether they have enough staff to expand, to run an expanded shelter. And I think from what we've heard is that, shelters do have limited staff, and they also want to make sure that they have the right staff to resident ratio as well. So just because these limits are removed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will automatically expand the number of people that they can accommodate, because they have to take a look at other factors, like do they have the funding to add staff and to add beds and add those other services as well.
And is there any regulation or anything that says what that staff to client ratio has to be?
Our understanding is that if there are, they would be in their funding agreements with the provincial government.
So the provincial government would be regulating that. So if, I mean, attachment 1, those bylaw changes as far as, not being located next to the heavy industrial zone. So if I wanted to remove the section to remove floor limit, then I would have to put a motion through then to remove that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I will think on that. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Thank you for all the great work has been done here. I do not have too many questions regarding the recommendation and the bylaw itself. I just want asking, in the reports, and it's talk about if we received as information, does that mean the recommendation you provided for the 2 recommendation here, so you don't need additional direction to move forward with the recommendation you put in the presentation?
Correct. If council receives this report for information, we will move forward with the amendments in attachment 1, but we will not move forward with the amendments in attachment 2. If council wants us to move forward with those amendments in attachment 2, a specific motion to that effect is required.
So that means, and that is proceeding with remove floor area limited? Is that attached?
In the BE zone, yes.
Yes, in the BE zone, and also this for the location between heavy industrial sites.
Yes, that's correct.
So you need direction for that.
We need the report to be received for information. For those 2 items to proceed, committee only needs to receive this report for information.
Okay, so if that's his case, I am going to move the motion and be received as information.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I am just going to focus on the wording around the heavy industrial. So I guess I'm wondering, with the proposed amendment in option 1, with the sites abutting heavy industrial, do we have any analysis on how many sites that would actually impact citywide? Because directly abutting, and yeah, let's just start with that question.
We don't have that information with us right now, but we can provide that to you.
So Councillor, typically within our industrial areas, that heavy industrial is located in the center of the neighborhood. It's then typically surrounded by medium industrial, and then we see the business employment or the former light industrial zones and IB zones next to the roads that connect to the larger network. So it kind of concentrates in the center, and then those riskier activities become less risky as they move outwards towards where we would typically see that BE zone.
Yeah, I know, but as I'm reading that's great. I understand that context, and this is why I'm pushing on it a little bit, because clearly in historical planning and ongoing planning with the zoning bylaw, we're being thoughtful about those setbacks and where we're putting different things. I guess what I'm worried about is because even it says it's intended to mitigate potential nuisances from industrial operations on shelter users and provide some spatial separation, and restricting sensitive use from locating next to heavy industrial sites. But I think the word abutting is what I'm stuck on, because if this goes forward and then we approve the bylaw amendment for option 1 as per the motion on the floor right now, could we not have scenarios in an industrial area where you have a heavy industrial next to a medium industrial that would then be next to a shelter all in a row?
That is, yes, so a shelter could be located beside a medium industrial zone, which would then be abutting a heavy industrial zone. But I think in that situation, the medium industrial site would be the one providing that spatial separation. And also just to respond to your original question, this information was actually provided in the back in the August report, and so we indicated that.
I thought so, yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, so we just had to look it up, and so there are, we identified that there are 87 business employment zoned sites that are abut heavy industrial zone sites.
So and the BE zone is the one that was changed in the new zoning bylaw that allowed for shelter usage.
That's correct.
Okay. So how many, sorry again, 87 you said?
Yes, 87.
Are those concentrated in any area, industrial area in the city? Do we know that?
That information we don't have on hand. We would have to provide that information at a later date.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at from a land use perspective is that setback sufficient to heavy industrial to just be abutting? And is it abutting rear, back, front, all? Yeah, can you just clarify that?
Yeah, so the rules would, wouldn't it would be any front, back, or side.
What about across an alley?
Sorry, that's adjacent. So abutting is sharing a property line, and adjacent is across. So across an alley, across a road.
So should it be adjacent instead of abutting? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
So Councillor, it's not a perfect solution by any means. When we're looking at citywide changes to regulations, you can't take into account every single situation. So our best recommendation is that abutting, which provides both the separation for the two uses. On the one side, it creates that buffer from heavy industrial uses for the sensitive users in the zone, and also it allows the continued operation of those heavy industrial uses and new uses in that heavy industrial zone. Again, it's not perfect, but it is our best recommendation if we were looking to do something here.
And sorry, Councillor, through the development permit process, we would also assess risk. And so any kind of mitigations that are needed would be determined at that time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I'm just wondering to the mover, would you remove that so I could put another motion to include both attachment 1 and attachment 2 bylaw amendments? And I guess, is that okay to the rest of the
Yeah,
committee?
yeah.
Yeah? Okay, thank you.
So Councillor Rice is going to withdraw the recommendation, and then Councillor Wright is going to move. Would you like to move, Councillor Wright?
I would like to move that administration prepare amendments to zoning bylaw 20001 as outlined in attachments 1 and 2 of the April 1st, 2025 Urban Planning and Economy Report and return to a future City Council public hearing.
Okay, all right. That is on the board. Questions then? Do you want to speak to it, or do you want to?
Just briefly, I think that the two have to go hand in hand so that there are some restrictions or regulations around the size of the sleeping areas for these shelters so that we don't get mega shelters.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Just to speak.
Okay, Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Chair Jans. I do have a question for administration. So this is against your recommendation?
That's
The
right.
number, yeah,
Attachment
attachment
two.
2.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And this would be coming back to council, correct?
Council public hearing.
Public hearing, right, okay. Okay, thank you.
And if I may just ask, Mr. Chair, just one really small tweak to the motion. Could we say and return for consideration to our future council public hearing? Is that, thank you.
I don't see why not. Look to the clerk. Is that a change we can make? And
Yes,
to
we
the
will make
mover,
those
is that
changes.
that doesn't change the?
Works for me.
Okay. All right. Councillor Stevens to speak to it. Councillor Rice, did you questions or speak? Okay, go ahead. So Councillor Rice then.
So if we, right now, we just give you direction and you go back to prepare something and come back for the public hearing. But so for the final decision, still based on the public hearing. So we're not vote for the final decision at this moment.
Correct. What you will see at the public hearing is the exact wording that has been prepared in both attachments 1 and 2.
So at that time, and people allowed to come to speak, and then we will vote based on what we heard.
Correct.
Okay. But still, one option is different from what you recommended today.
Yes, and that's council or committee's will. We provided our best recommendation, and the motion on the floor is up for debate right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Councillor Jans. I'm very torn. So, do we have, I'm just looking, anyone from Intergov to answer questions today?
We don't, but we have our housing team, which is deeply connected into
Yeah.
the provincial government. in
Yeah,
that realm.
and we had some good chats yesterday. I don't even know if we can debate. I'm trying to get a sense of, so you had some conversations in the What We Heard report. The province was pretty clear in why they didn't want that, I think. I think ultimately they want to abide by the standards that I think have been set out now for some time and generally speaking have been moving in that direction, I would argue. I very much hear my colleagues' desire to sort of like, if it's that's going to be the case anyways, why not just like put it in there? So I guess I'm curious, did we have that particular dialogue with them to say, hey, you're not trying to do this anyways, your standards would suggest you're not going to go down that route. So what was sort of the rationale for them to say, if we're not going to do this anyways on their end, what would be the harm of us sort of making that clear on ours? Do we have any insight into that, or did we get into that level of detail with them?
I don't think we got into that level of detail and circumstance in our discussions.
Okay. As if this were to go to a public hearing, we would be sharing this information with them and giving them a chance to provide a response like anyone else would as well. Is that correct? They could provide maybe some more detail or context as to why they might or might not want that change?
Yes, we would follow up with all the stakeholders that we engage to inform them of the outcome of today, and they can choose to participate in the public hearing if they wish.
Okay. Because this is a sort of a change to an amendment to the zoning bylaw versus a site-specific piece, are they would they be considered a stakeholder that you would circulate to, or how might that work? I'm just wanting to get a sense of, would they only be notified that you got to keep your eye out for the report a week and a half out, or would there be something that would be sent to them in advance to say, here's what's being proposed, please share your feedback, that would be included in the report?
We would lean on our existing relationships and follow up with the work that we did on this one. Because it's a citywide scale, it's a little different in terms of how we approach that engagement.
Okay, so I'm hearing there's a potential. It wouldn't just simply be like if somebody was doing a rezoning next door in the 60-meter range, we would go and actually reach out to everyone we've done in the What We Heard report to say, this is going to be coming back. We'd like your feedback. We'll capture that. We'll use that to inform because your recommendation. I mean, I don't want to presuppose the outcome. You haven't recommended this for us today, but a public hearing is different. You will have a different set of you could have a different set of recommendations pending what you've heard from everyone.
Correct, and I would just like to reiterate, I don't suspect the conversations would change in terms of what not only the service providers, but the province would like to see in terms of limiting some of that regulation throughout it. So just to be clear, I wouldn't expect any of that to change in any sort of report that we bring forward.
I don't either, and it's just I'm aware of some colleagues want to have this discussion, and I'm not sold, but I also don't want to stop the conversation per se. So I'm going to think about it a little more.
And just to add, the 125 limit, there is still variance power within the zoning bylaw that can accommodate additional spaces. Obviously, it creates that additional regulation that if you don't have that perfect site, then it creates those additional hurdles to meeting that housing demand that is needed.
Which I know I don't think there's one right now in the West End that isn't this large that been sort of dealing with some hurdles even now, and so I'm trying to figure out how to make sure we're not. Okay. All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
If I can jump in quickly, just take my 5 minutes. To administration, so if this passes, I'm thinking about it a different way in terms of red tape reduction. Is there if you have a site and you want to move ahead on it and it's going to be 127 people or space for 130 in a congregate sleeping area, right now you'd have to go for a variance. How long would that take?
Depends how it's structured, Councillor. So if it was above the 125, you'd go for a variance. If all else being equal, that permit has been approved, it would go on notice for 3 weeks, for 21 days. If it's appealed, it goes to Subdivision Development Appeal Board, which adds extra months to get that hearing set. So worst case scenario, you're probably in the 3-month range.
And then potentially as well, would there be other inspections or other things that would need to happen or anything else different?
No, just at the development approval and the SDAB hearing.
And am I guess what I'm worried about is in the sense of, I hear the providers, I hear everybody saying we'd prefer smaller, more frequent, more distributed spaces if available, but I'm trying to envision why we would regulate so specifically. Is there say you had 100 people in congregate sleeping areas, but then you had another 100 people in dorm rooms, how would that be looked at?
The proposed regulations are only for the congregate sleeping area portion, not for any private or semi-private areas.
So, given that we want to be moving more towards private and sleeping areas, I guess I'm wondering if this is even necessary to put in or not, and I guess maybe to the mover, Are you worried about this somehow delaying access to shelter for those who need it when we have a site that's available and ready to go that could maybe do a little more? Given the fact that we're talking about 125 spaces, we have 5,000 people who may need shelter. We're going to need a lot more sites, not less.
I guess my concern is I'm gonna, this might not be politically correct, but warehousing people and just putting more people in where there isn't really adequate space, adequate supports. There's not necessarily any staff-client ratio. And I would also like the opportunity for the public to weigh in on this. The targeted stakeholders were the shelter providers and the government of Alberta, but I'm also, with the, coming forward with the public hearing with all this together, would give those that maybe serve some of our houseless individuals and houseless individuals themselves to weigh in on it.
And I guess I'm worried that, like, given the fact that congregate sleeping areas would be a last resort, an emergency measure, if we don't even have that, if you're the 126th person who shows up, you're now sent to the sidewalk.
Or can other shelter providers provide, adequate space somewhere else?
I guess I'm worried it's so hard to get up and running on even a single shelter that we have, and look at the months and months and months we've had multiple meetings and discussions about various sites. It's not the same, but even looking at the situation in Ritchie with the health hub, how that got tripped up on a whole bunch of things. Like I really worry that we're in just still such a crisis. We've declared a home housing emergency that I'm struggling with any, like I would like to say they should all have Wi-Fi, beds, access to public education, access to everything. I'd like to make this truly a dignified space for everyone that people should have. But I'm really worried that even what seems like a small impediment may end up tripping up our. And I mean, it's been so hard to get this province to do anything. But even if they come and they say, okay, well, here's something for 130 people, that we'd have to say, well, no, you require a variance and it has to do this. So I guess I'm struggling with, are we making the perfect the enemy of the good enough?
And I see where you're coming from with, red tape and the 3-month delay and things like that Travis spoke of. But I'm just, if it's going to come forward to a public hearing, I think maybe we should have it all out on the table for consideration.
Fair enough. Thank you. Councillor Stevenson, were you questions or speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. A few questions have come out of the conversation. So to administration, when I'm looking at the province of Alberta's shelter accommodation expectations, which I believe the most recent version is from October 2024, I don't see any reference to the size of the shelter or to 24/7 operations. So is there another document where the province has set out their commitment to smaller shelters?
We're not aware of another public document, but what we don't see is the terms of the funding agreements. And so our anticipation is that that's where those terms would be.
Right, but again, in terms of a policy, a strategy, the province has not articulated, what you've heard and what I think we're seeing in practice. Just to be clear, I think all the new shelter capacity that has been added has generally been in these smaller sites. In some cases, it has added to existing sites, existing large sites, but generally the new shelters that are opening have been smaller. But again, that's not through any commitment or policy or practice that is currently written down.
Councillor, sorry, Rachel from Affordable Housing. That information is found in the 2022 Action Plan on Homelessness, where the Government of Alberta makes their commitment to move all shelter operations to 24/7 and to move shelter operators to operate as service hubs where they're able to provide supports and services to folks to help them get housing and what other supports they need.
Okay, great, but nothing on size?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, so I think that's just important context as well. I guess I have some reluctance just in terms of not having clarity in another document. Again, it seems like intentions and practice are heading in that direction, which is very positive and great to see. Again, I'm not seeing the impact of adding our own regulations that support that direction. Maybe just following up, so I understand that the two existing shelters that exceed this maximum amount are in standard zones, the urban facilities zone. So would they become legally non-conforming if these regulations pass? And what's the implications of that?
So, so if they apply for a development permit to make any exterior alterations to the building or to the site, then they would need to apply for a variance to the regulation if it was approved.
Oh, okay. So it would still be possible, it would just be required a variance. Okay. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Wright, questions, or because it's your motion now?
I did have a question, and then I lost my train of thought when you asked me yours, so
Okay. Can I
no,
go to
yeah,
Councillor
go to
Principe then?
Councillor
Councillor
Principe,
Principe.
yeah.
Thank you, Chair Jans. Just quickly, is zoning the only place we can address this, or is it through development? I thought I heard you say earlier that in the development phase.
What I was referring to earlier was the assessment of risk when in proximity to a heavy industrial use. But in terms of regulating size, the zoning bylaw would be the appropriate location to do that.
Okay, no other permitting, like maybe not development, maybe there's other permitting?
It would all be governed by the zoning bylaw. Like in terms of any kind of permit, you look back to the zoning bylaw in terms of what the rules are.
Okay.
The only other thing I would add is that the fire code will restrict occupancy based on those regulations.
Okay, so the fire code is one. Okay. Okay, thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Councillor Wright?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, can you tell me what the two larger existing shelters are?
Those would be the Herb Jameson Center and the Hope Mission main site.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further councillors for questions, I guess we'll move to debate. Any councillors want to speak to the recommendation? Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Councillor Jans. This is one of those times I'm going to be speaking where I don't actually know my answer at all right now and really want to hear others. My initial reaction is I think I'm willing to support this to go to a public hearing with extreme caution that doesn't mean I would be willing to support it when it comes to the public hearing. But I'll keep an open mind, as one must, throughout that process. It's just I feel like I'm passionate. Like, this is one of those weird situations where it's like, I'm sure we agree like 99.9% of what we need to do, and this one little thing is throwing me off here. I'm similar to Councillor Jan's line of questioning. I'm worried that this accidentally creates some barriers at a time where we just spent yesterday talking about trying to find collaborative ways to work with the province, and the province has said that this is something that they don't feel is needed. At the same time, very much appreciate the point around we don't want to create an environment where, and I think that term is actually a fair term to use, the warehousing of people and creating these massive spaces, because when that happened during COVID, that wasn't good for anyone. It wasn't good for the people that needed that support, and I think there were a lot of lessons from that. So, and then the third element in all of this is I don't actually think we're going to see any new shelters open up anytime soon, because it was hard enough to get the one on 149th Street across from the Costco. That took a lot for the province and everyone to get there. I mean, I'd sure love to see them decentralized out of the core, but I just don't know if that's realistic. And on top of that, even if there was an appetite to start looking at that, I'd much rather them focus on housing right now and building permanent homes so that we don't have to constantly rely on the shelter conversation. So feels like 10 different moving parts in this. But I would say even with my great hesitation right now on attachment 2, assuming there are enough colleagues who at least want to have that conversation at a public hearing, I would feel wrong shutting it down at committee if there are other colleagues who at least want to debate that. So that's where my initial head is at, but happy to hear others. Thank you.
Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not on committee, but I'm very concerned with this motion on the floor. My preferred path would absolutely have been receipt for information. I think it allows us to put in some measures and levers in our zoning bylaw to address, things like minimum shelter standards, while also taking into account intergovernmental relations, potential unintended consequences as were outlined by Councillor Jans. I'd also like to remind my council colleagues that we're at committee, we're not at council, and anybody could have signed up to speak to this item at committee. We didn't have anybody signed up to speak to this item. So why we think that bringing this to public hearing to get more people speaking to it is a good use of everybody's time. And then when we go to public hearing, we're limited only to land use considerations, not the bigger intergovernmental pieces that we consider at committee. I honestly don't understand why we're going down this path. I understand. I hate warehousing people and the congregate spaces, but at the end of the day, we are sending contradictory messages. If we're saying stay in our lane, let's stay in our lane. And it is up to shelters to make those agreements with shelter providers and for the government of Alberta to be accountable to Edmontonians and the public of Alberta at large if they are doing things that Edmontonians and Albertans think are not in line with their values around addressing the houseless and houselessness issue. Why are we going to take that on, create problems when we're literally have a motion we're going to be debating next week at council that's a recommendation from committee to say let's work collaboratively with the province? How is this going to set up that conversation? How is that letter going to be received? Please do not move this motion forward, and please just receive for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. I'll jump in quickly. I agree with what Councillor Rutherford said, and I just want to reiterate again, we're looking at 5,000 unhoused individuals. It has tripled since the 2019, and I again not saying that this is putting 300 people in congregate sleeping areas is the answer. That's not, and I hear people saying that that's not. But I just think any delay, any extra wordage, anything here could have unintended consequences that I'm worried about. That's all I have to say. Councillor Rice.
Thank you for the debate. So I withdraw to receive the information because I do not want to stop my colleagues to have a conversation and to explore the better, or you believe the better option, and for the people actually really need help. So, but after carefully listen to all the debate here, I'm not going to support this. I think that receive the information and the recommendation, the best recommendation we heard from our experts said there, and from city administration said very clear, even though we're going to the public hearing process, for that process there are a few factors we need to consider about the timing. And right now it's urgent, we need some permanent solution instead of like some solution actually, and based on the juristic scanning, and then it's not the better solution. And then no other place even use this type of solution. And why we're going to that path, even take more time or more energy, and then to open to that communication and also intergovernmental issue. I feel like Councillor Rutherford said very well, and then I am not going to repeat that piece. But I do believe if we have some public voice, and today is a great opportunity for people to sign up, but nobody even sign up, come to speak. So I think we should give the respect to the best recommendation and from city administration. So I will not support this. Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson. Oh, my apologies. I haven't introduced our special guests yet. We have a group of grade 12 students from Our Lady of the Prairies School. Did I get that right? April Fool's Day. And yes, grade 6 students from Our Lady of the Prairie School, which is in Ward CP Winniwalk. And your city councillor is Councillor Hamilton, who isn't here right now. I don't think is with us online, but you might be able to meet with her later in your visit. And are led by teacher guest McDonald, or Teacher McDonald. Yes, welcome. So we are here debating many exciting urban planning issues today. So you're welcome to come and stay, or to wander City Hall and enjoy this wonderful building that belongs to all of you. So let's give them a warm welcome. And Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Paquette.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation today and appreciate the hesitations of my colleagues. It does certainly feel uncomfortable to be looking to limit emergency services for Edmontonians who may be in need. But I want to share some perspectives of a councillor representing an area where over 80% of shelter capacity currently exists in 2 large facilities. These are run by organizations that do great work, who work to support Edmontonians experiencing homelessness, to meet their needs and connect them to housing. But the size and scale of these shelters have an undeniable impact on the surrounding community. We also know that large facilities do not serve the people accessing them either. I'm struggling because we all agree that large shelters are not what we want. I think we all agree that shelters are not a solution. They are a response, and that we actually need the longer term housing, the investment in the longer term housing solutions to address the crisis. So I am confused then why that next step, to reflect those values, to reflect those realities in our zoning bylaw, then becomes a step too far. Our lane and our jurisdiction is in land use. That is a municipal role and responsibility, and regulating land use means regulating potential land use impacts in our community. For me, there's no conflict there. This is squarely within our role. And again, I'm not hearing that this is in opposition to any intentions or plans of the provincial government in terms of how they deliver shelters in the future. Again, it seems like an opportunity for us to align our practices and ensure that we are embodying the minimum shelter standards that we developed as a city, that have been adopted by the province, in another tool that we have in our tool belt. I would respectfully request that if this motion seems like it's not going to pass, that it be requisitioned to council as like an opportunity to speak and to vote on this as an issue that's very important to the area I represent, and I would argue to all of our areas in terms of future work. So I would ask that of my colleagues on committee. Thank you.
All right. Hearing one for requisition. Is there another? Oh, I see what you mean. Not a committee member. You're right. Okay. Councillor Paquette?
Should I wait? Is there
No.
something about
You
to
have the
happen?
floor. You have the
Okay.
floor.
Thank you. So I think we should speak a little bit plainly and directly about what's at the heart of this discussion. And while square footage and air circulation and zoning and jurisdictional boundaries are all vital, I just want to take the opportunity, since I have it, to talk a little bit about dignity. It's not an abstract idea. It's the bedrock of what it means to be treated like a human being. And for far too many people in Edmonton, it's a daily struggle to access even the most basic conditions that allow them to feel safe, respected, and seen. So when someone loses their housing, they don't lose their humanity. And yet the conditions we currently tolerate in some shelter environments would suggest otherwise. So overcrowded sleeping areas, insufficient space between beds, lack of privacy, exposure to trauma and violence. These are not simply technical flaws. They're failures of values. They're failures to meet a fundamental moral standard. So obviously this report lays out several paths we can take, and some are immediate, some are longer. And what I'm thinking about here is there is such a large question, as Councillor Knack alluded to, that has multiple layers around it. And I don't know what the answer is as far as a public hearing. I'm not sure what the outcome is intended to be or would be. I also don't want to close the door on people being able to come to council and speak. If there are councillors who want to have that and the public who want to come and speak about it. I just don't know if we're going to hear anything new. We might. We might. But I think what we all know is that regulated congregate sleeping areas is not an actual answer. It is not a solution. It's a floor, not a ceiling. Ultimately, we need the province to move toward spaces that offer real privacy, real autonomy, and real pathways to housing, and that housing must be built. And I think that at this point, all levels of government are on the same page on that, but some more on that page than others. And until we get there, it is really imperative that even our emergency responses are rooted in respect. Because the opposite of dignity is not just indignity. I can tell you that the opposite of dignity is despair. It's the feeling that society has given up on you, that your pain doesn't matter, that your safety is negotiable, that your worth is conditional, that you're invisible, or at least the desire is to make you invisible. And when people internalize that, it makes recovery extremely, extremely difficult. It deepens trauma. It prolongs suffering. We all know that if we want better outcomes, how many times can we talk about this? How many times do we lay out a path? And how many times does it crash against deaf ears and hardened hearts? As noted, this isn't about perfection. It's about trying to find some kind of progress on an issue that is only growing. And I know I'm not speaking directly to this motion on the floor, but I just wanted to share those thoughts. And I'll close by saying this: dignity can't wait. We are a city of compassion, a city of community, and a city that understands that housing is a human right. And when we fall short of that, or do half measures, we betray that principle of human dignity. So, thank you.
So, thank you, Councillor Paquette.
I'd like to say requisition.
Okay.
Requisition.
So 2 councillors have said requisition, so this will, clerk, could you clarify the next steps?
So discussion of this item ends today at committee, and it will be on the next City Council agenda, which is April 8th.
Okay, thank you. I believe that brings us to item 7.2. And we'll wait for a minute for the administration to do a pit stop. please begin when ready.
Good morning, Urban Planning Committee. My name is Kent Snyder. I'm Branch Manager of Planning and Environment Services. Our delegation is here to present the report on the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy Reserve Fund. The Public Realm Strategy was before committee last October. It is a long-term vision for improvements to streets, sidewalks, and open spaces as Old Strathcona densifies in the coming decades. In receiving the strategy for information, Urban Planning Committee passed a subsequent motion directing administration to explore establishing a reserve fund to help pay for the improvements consistent with the strategy. Eric Backstrom, Senior Planner from the project team, has a short presentation on the reserve fund report that is before you today.
Hello. Next slide, please. The standard process to fund new open spaces in built-up parts of the city is through allocation of pay-as-you-go funding as prioritized through the capital budget process. The new parks built in recent years in the core of the city, however, have been exclusively or primarily funded through a different tool, the Community Revitalization Levy. As there is no CRL south of the river, this is not a possibility for Old Strathcona. Next slide. Urban Planning's committee motion directed us to explore using two new sources of city revenue to go into a reserve fund for Old Strathcona improvements. The first was revenue from a large surface parking lot that's about to transition from being managed by the Old Strathcona Farmers Market to become a city-run e-park lot. Administration estimates that net revenue from this parking lot will total $5.9 million over 10 years. The second revenue source we were asked to examine is the sale of city-owned property. The report looks at 3 different properties in the area and focuses on property along Saskatchewan Drive that the Public Realm Strategy designates for mixed market development. There are a lot of variables, and it's not prudent to talk publicly about expected revenues from the sale of this property. So suffice it to say that any net revenues from the sale of this property could be additional to the parking revenues I previously mentioned if a reserve fund were to be established. Next slide. As outlined in the report, however, establishing a reserve for neighborhood-specific, shorter-term purposes such as the public space improvements and activations envisioned in the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy is not consistent with the city's reserve and equity accounts policy. Instead, administration will direct these new city revenues into general revenue and land enterprise retained earnings, and Old Strathcona Public Realm projects will be prioritized for operating and capital funding from the tax levy through the 2027 to 2030 budget prioritization process. Future work on Action 5 of the Curbside Management Strategy will clarify how parking benefit districts could be established in Edmonton. Thank you. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have after the speakers.
All right. Thank you very much. We now will hear from speakers from the public. I'd invite clerk to help get our guests seated, Sheree Clausen, John McKell, and Mark Wilson. Awesome. So, guest Clausen, you're first up. When you're ready to proceed, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for having us here today. My name is Sheree Clausen. I'm the Executive Director for the Old Strathcona Business Association, which is a BIA here in Edmonton, and we represent nearly 600 businesses in our district. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today regarding the establishment of this reserve fund for the Public Realm Strategy, as Eric laid out. I just want to give a little bit of a context and history on how long we've been talking about this Public Realm Strategy. So since the approval of Plan White in 2018, our BIA has been advocating for the development of this Public Realm Strategy. For the past 7 years since I took on this role, we have persistently urged the city to invest in our district's plan for renewed infrastructure. Last year, after 2 years of community engagement and strategic development, we fully and enthusiastically endorsed the Old Strathcona Public Realm strategy. When we addressed committee last year, Councillor Jans suggested creating a reserve fund to support the financing of next steps in this long overdue strategy. Particularly, as Eric laid out, there's no budget allocated for these future stages. And when we were disappointed to learn that the tourism district and economic driver like ours did not have dedicated funds to renew this infrastructure, which is now over 40 years old, we saw this as an opportunity. To be clear, we strongly support the establishment of a reserve fund, as it represents our primary means for financing this really important project. Unlike downtown, which has access to a CRL, as just noted, and downtown vibrancy funds, our district lacks similar financial resources. We understand that the city's finances are currently under significant pressure, which is why we feel this reserve fund is a very innovative solution. By setting aside revenue generated from the parking lot and land sales within our district, we can reinvest directly back into our community. And honestly, it's not uncommon for cities to reinvest parking revenue into areas where it's generated. For example, in 2017, the City of Calgary approved a parking revenue policy, which guided the Parking Revenue Reinvestment Program. The aims in that program sound very, very similar to what we're looking at. So their objectives in paid parking areas include facilitating a strong pedestrian environment, implementing complete streets, providing incremental improvements to area parking, enhancing urban design, and adding to the vibrancy of the area. All sound very much like the public realm strategy. Moreover, the city's own curbside management strategies, which align with city plan, recommend the creation of a parking benefits district. This would allow the city to reinvest those parking revenues back into the community where they were collected, fostering local improvements like enhanced sidewalks, secure bicycle parking, and amenities like benches, lighting, plants, and trees, and public art. Research indicates that when users can clearly see where their parking fees are being utilized with real tangible results, they're more likely to support those parking prices to help manage the demand. This approach enables the city to manage parking space resources more efficiently, more effectively, and maximizing public benefit. So in light of what we've evidenced from other cities and our own policies demonstrating the benefits of reinvesting parking revenue into communities, I pose the question to the committee: will you support the establishment of a reserve fund for our district's public realm improvement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Guest McKell.
My name is John McKellen. I'm the owner of Laurels on White at 8210 104th Street in Old Strathcona. I've been the owner of this floral studio since 2012. I'm also proud to be the chair of the Old Strathcona Business Association since January of this year. I believe Old Strathcona is the tourism and shopping jewel of the city of Edmonton. While sometimes our jewel can get dull and dusty, it should never be neglected. It should always shine. But with that shine and polish comes proper investment. Over the last few years, we business owners have noticed our jewel getting a little dull and dusty, and that's a big problem. Our district is long overdue for revitalization. After 40 years, the need is clear. While downtown has seen significant investment, our community has been left behind. The aging infrastructure is not only obvious, but also negatively impacts how our district is perceived to our own citizens and the citizens of the world. We've seen firsthand how renewal can bring back life to an area. Just think back to how the Avenue thrived after its renewal in the 1980s. But we know that this renewal did not come free. The city invested millions of dollars in our district to help it look the way that it did, and we need that appreciated investment again. We have proven time and time again that our district is world famous. It is attractive and desired by tourists abroad and citizens alike. In fact, just recently we've had tour guides come from all over to our city, and White Avenue was the top place they wanted to be and stay. Not downtown, not West End. One of the key resources we have is revenue from the farmers market parking lot. Historically, those funds have stayed in our community, and that should continue. However, it is time to expand the benefit beyond just the market and use it for broader improvements. With a secured revenue source, we can engage in long-term planning that directly addresses our district's needs. More importantly, we can involve the community in shaping how these funds are reinvested, ensuring that revitalization is not just something that happens to us, but something we help design for the future. White Avenue needs a polish. Help us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guest Wilson.
Members of Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy Reserve Fund, and I'm here to speak in opposition to the recommendation of administration. Today is the 18th anniversary of my business, Vivid Print, which rather appropriately opened on April Fool's Day in 2007, and the 16th anniversary of our relocation to White Avenue. We chose to relocate to the area because of its status of one of Edmonton's top visitor and resident destinations, and because of the unique character and flavor the community provides. I was 16 years old when the original rehabilitation of White Avenue took place. The area experienced a significant uptick in commercial tendencies and pedestrian activity in the period directly after the work was undertaken because of the attractiveness and improved walkability of the area. Since that time, however, there has only been one minor period of upkeep when the brick sidewalks were completely replaced. Currently, the area is in a state of significant decay. Crumbling sidewalks and curbs, corroded and non-functioning street lighting well past their 25-year life cycle, and a random patchwork to prevent pedestrians from tripping over heaved concrete and missing portions of pathways. Most recently, we have lost a significant portion of our boulevard trees due to the undersized root boxes that were initially installed in the 1980s. If we're going to continue to point to White Avenue as a major tourist destination, we need to ensure that the reality lives up to the hype. While significant funds have understandably been allocated for downtown revitalization via various financial instruments, no such similar allocation has been made for our community. The revenue from this lot over the past 30 years has stayed in the community to further enhance it, albeit to a single amenity. By allowing this new city revenue stream, in addition to future land sales, to be earmarked for the implementation of the OSPRS, it allows for the funds to be a benefit for the entire community. While I understand that the recommendation is to make the area funding requirements a priority for the upcoming 2027-2030 budget cycle, I fear that the current budgetary pressures on the city will cause this important project to be pushed even further back, kicking the can down the road on the significant investment. By earmarking these revenues today, the city will reduce the friction points for successive councils to undertake this important project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just wondering if there's anybody have questions for our speakers? And I will hand the chair back to Councillor Jans.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I guess my question is, maybe to each of you, jump in if you'd like, or as you're kind of an unofficial delegation, whoever wants to speak to it. I think at a bare minimum, we could agree that the parking revenue, because it's completely new revenue, like it never went to the city beforehand, that this should remain in the area. Am I missing something there?
Agreed.
Okay, and you're not aware of any other like Canada Investment Infrastructure Grant or some new CRL, or you've reached out to the Premier about supporting the area, you've reached out to government, you've done a lot of advocacy. Is there any other Hail Mary pitch that we could get, like long bomb?
Not to my knowledge, and in fact, I'll just remind this committee that in order for us to do some of these upgrades, like street furniture, benches, seating space, bike racks, our organization spent that money. So we actually went to the federal government through Prairie's Economic Development and got a community revitalization grant, which is now no longer available, of $250,000, of which we contributed 25% of that, to do these infrastructure upgrades because it's so long overdue. And as you can probably be aware, $250,000 doesn't go very far. So, you know, we got, I think, an additional 40 seats and 25 bike racks. But that is not anywhere near enough what we need to see in terms of revitalization. So.
And you're also aware the area is going to triple in population over the next, in the Strathcona district, we're going to triple in population. And I see no other funding stream available because we took out like developer contributions out of zoning bylaw towards park space or something else. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, very much so. It's very concerning to us, even just seeing the population growth we've seen in the last couple of years that you guys are all aware of. That's going to put extra infrastructure pressure on our district, which welcomes over 1 million people a year, and we need to fast track this fund to start getting some money in place.
So when we densified downtown, we had funding available to do like warehouse park and amenities, etc. But we're already rapidly densifying this area. There's been so many rezonings on everywhere from 109th to 99th, and this is I don't know of another mechanism to get funding for public amenities. Can I ask, you touched on briefly the tourism numbers. Do you have a ballpark what the impact is, or?
Yeah, our ballpark is about 1 million. It's not very well measured, so I mean, you could do a bit of an economic analysis of what a minimum of 1 million people. I mean, Fringe alone brings 250,000 people a year over 10 days. So you can even imagine just during those 10 days of Fringe, what happens when you bring 250,000 people to our district and in a very narrow space where Fringe is. So I mean, I would say it's well over 1 million throughout the year.
And you're also aware of our BRT planning, that we're going to be moving a lot more people through the avenue.
Yes, because that was part of the public realm strategy, which our board enthusiastically supported. So yes.
Mm-hmm. I guess the last one, you mentioned in Calgary, the curbside management strategy with parking benefit areas, where the revenue collected for parking is reinvested into the area. We have something like that in our curbside strategy as well. So this would be dedicating the funds to this area collected from this new area would be aligned with the city's already stated direction.
Yeah, and in fact, I'd go beyond this parking lot. So if the city would consider all e-park in our district, that revenue be reinvested back into this reserve fund or something similar, yeah, we would very much support that as well.
I think my gut is that would go over better for the people who are paying to park at, say, the market or elsewhere. I know some of us have got emails from folks who are a little scratchy about the removal of the subsidized parking. If they knew, you're paying $1, but that $1 is getting reinvested into a new bench, a new tree, a new something in the area, do you think that would reduce the flow to your inboxes as well?
Well, and that's even what I read according to research that is well known, and that's even mentioned in the city's own report for curbside management. So yes, it would be great to be able to advertise that. I mean, we would be another group that could help advertise that. For every $1 you spend in parking your vehicle in Old Strathcona, that money is reinvested back in our neighborhood. I think that would be such an incredible way to show support of the community.
Okay, I'll stop asking leading questions. I'll turn the chair over to Councillor Knack. Wouldn't you agree this is an amazing proposal and we should have, yeah, okay. Councillor Knack.
You actually, that was going to be my last question, recognizing the farmer's market change and people's discomfort with that. I thought that didn't sound like a leading question. I was actually going to ask that question myself. So you've answered it. Thank you. I'm out of no more questions.
If I may, I have a motion to put on the floor. Well, are there any other questions?
City administration. No, we have to wait for after question to city administration.
Oh, yes, I see. Thank you, Councillor Rice. Of course, yes. No other questions to our speakers? You didn't have one? No. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, please grab your chairs if you'd like. We'll continue the discussion. So then, questions to city administration. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think this is a really interesting one. I represent a number of BIAs that would love to see parking benefit areas. So just want to understand if that curbside management action is contrary to our budgeting processes. Like, does that mean we're not advancing that? Like, how are we moving forward with that action that was laid out in the curbside management strategy?
Councillor, that action is a future action when there are more areas that there's a lot of pressure. We need to do something about parking and come into the fullness of time when we can advance it more fully. And yes, it is in conflict with our current financial policies.
But again, that would be, the work would be to work through that conflict and develop a new, like, it's not like we can just change the budgeting principles, correct? I mean, not to be flippant, but.
Yeah, I think it's something we still have to explore in much more detail and see what the impacts of that are on the broader, on the broader community, on the budgeting practices. But yeah, you're right, Councillor Stevenson. Like right now, those parking revenues generally flow to general revenues to offset all city expenditures. So that's kind of the process we use right now.
Yeah.
And the establishment of a reserve fund, the way we manage our reserves right now, we typically don't have it for specific items like this. They're broader reserves to fund like larger programs, like the neighborhood renewal program, for example.
Yeah, well, you know, one thing that stands out to me, just from a budgeting perspective, is that effectively this funding on these lots is going to be multi-year funding. It won't be ongoing, right? Eventually, we do plan to sell this land and lose that parking revenue, correct?
No, for this parcel of land, I believe the intent is for this land to be redeveloped as open space.
Oh, sure, but sorry.
Or as district park.
But we would, the plan is to eventually remove the parking revenue.
Correct.
From that land. And so I just wonder, from a budgetary perspective, is there not a risk in building our budgets around this income stream, which we know to have a shelf life?
So are you speaking more generally, Councillor Stevenson, or to this specific item?
To very much this specific parcel. So again, I think when I think about sort of general e-park revenue, it is an ongoing budget item. We continue to receive revenue from those, and we will have curbside parking in those areas, I think, for years to come. I think with this specific lot, its intended future use is a park space, not a parking lot. And so if we get used to receiving $600,000 a year in revenue, you know, how do we manage that budget loss when it is redeveloped into a park?
Yeah, so when it is redeveloped into a park, and Bart, you can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong here, and if we lose the parking revenues at that time, I think that's a decision we can make at that time to see like what's the cost benefit, what are we getting in land sales versus how much parking revenue are we losing. But yeah, it's a discussion that we'll have at that time.
Yeah, I think that's just a way, because again, I think I both follow the logic of this this approach. I think it could open up a kettle of worms, but I do also think that, again, what is unique about this is that it's effectively a temporary use and a temporary revenue stream, and so having a dedicated purpose for that, there's some logic to that for me. I just wanted to ask, I'm not sure if anyone from IIS would speak to this, but is it, the only other thought I have is, if we're saving up in this reserve fund for the cash, wouldn't we normally fund these types of investment through borrowing rather than cash?
Councillor, we would probably, it would be through the budget, whether that was borrowing or pay-as-you-go. I think it would probably more likely be pay-as-you-go for the design. This money is specifically, it's, you know, small amounts. It would allow the design of some of these spaces, which could then flow into the capital budget asks.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. No further questions.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you. When's Liberation Day?
For the parking lot?
No, for Trump's tariffs. And I'm concerned that we are designating this without knowing about the unknowns of what's going to happen, and I think, you know, from a financial perspective, that the city needs to sort of keep a little bit of cash on side in case we have some unknowns that arise as of tomorrow. Do we have anything stashed aside?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just repeat that question?
Do we have any funds available to mitigate the Trump tariffs that are going to come in tomorrow?
So we're going to be having that discussion coming up in the spring, the tax levy confirmation report coming later this month. Okay. So that's where we can talk about that.
Okay. So are we, if we were to, I think with the motions that are coming forward from Councillor Jans today, should we maybe just hold this decision aside until after we know a little bit more clearly of what what the implications are going to be from the tariffs and any other budgetary concerns that we might have?
So on this item specifically, I think you have to decide if you think this is going to be somehow impactful to that decision. Setting aside $600,000 in a reserve fund right now, I don't think that's going to be too impactful to that tariff discussion. So I think you can make the decision separately if you wanted to.
Okay. That's good to know. I still think that this is a long-term plan for the Strathcona public realm. And this is just a short term, and as Councillor Stevenson suggested, temporary income. I think where my thoughts were going on this report mainly was, I just wanted to get a bit more information on the, historical significance of some of those buildings. So the Armory, just confirming that it is protected?
Correct, provincially and municipally.
Okay. There's no historical significance to the parking lot off Saskatchewan Drive?
It's a very old parking lot, but correct.
Okay. Nobody important parked there at any time? Or okay. But then, so the public market, that's not protected?
Correct, and just for clarification, as heritage planners, we talk about the Strathcona Public Market being, it's the building that Old Strathcona Youth Society used to be in, and it's identified in the report, not the big farmers market building. But yes, correct, the Strathcona Public Market building is historically significant but not protected.
Okay, and so I look on Google Maps and it's a really sort of funky painted, looks like a little house or something. But what is more the historical significance of that building?
So it's the oldest municipal building that's still standing. It was built by the city of Strathcona in 1909 when they were competing against the big bad neighbor across the river they wanted to establish a market just like Edmonton had one. And so it was a market building for their brand new Southside Market. The market lasted through the amalgamation years into the Depression. Then when the Depression hit, the market collapsed. And so the building was reused after World War II. It was the Edmonton Police Service were in there. And then they were in there to the 70s, and then a succession of nonprofit uses, most recently Old Strathcona Youth Society. And it's believed to be the oldest market building in Alberta.
In Alberta, okay. So historical significance doesn't necessarily, but there's no protection for that.
Correct.
How can we protect it?
Well,
because this is looking or being considered to be sold, correct?
Correct. Yes. It actually. Yeah. So the city. There is a form of protection that the city has owned it since 1909, but through a process at just looking at all the properties, we have a lot of historical buildings that we don't have the funding to renovate, and so this was one that a process was looked at and to look at selling, and so it is for sale currently.
Okay, because I know. Oh, and my time is up. Okay, I'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Rice.
So I have a few questions regarding the city's budget process. So we do have standardized practice and for any new parking revenue and where this funding is going, what is funding will be used, right?
Correct. That's right, Councillor Rice.
Right now, and then I should ask my question after Councillor Jens puts the motion. So, if we set up those any new parking revenue, not only in White Avenue and in the downtown area, West End area, or other like commercial concentrated area, as the return to the current area. So can you tell me what's the impact for that prioritizing process and in overall the budget?
So I can start, Councillor Rice. So through the budgeting practice right now, all your tax levy revenues and all your other revenues that you collect, you allocate them out to the priorities that are established through the budget process. So that's how the prioritization process works, and that's how those funds are allocated.
Yeah, it's my understanding for certain area we may have a shortfall and for the parking revenue, and then we can use new parking revenue and to offset those shortfall and in overall and at citywide level, right?
So in general, you are going to have a shortfall, if you call it that, across various branches, because the revenues, the non-tax levy revenues, which include parking revenues, aren't sufficient to cover off all your expenditures, and that shortfall is covered off through tax levy.
And so, yes, I understand for that piece. So if we are implement some like the action, take some action here, just to put the revenue back to the local reinvestment, that means even create the bigger gap and in the shortfall as well.
Correct.
Okay, so that's so city administration's recommendations specifically talk about use our through the 2027-23 budget prioritizing process. So can you tell me what's the difference between these two process? What's the specific implication and then for the usage of the funding? So what I heard from public speakers today is they want to use the funding right away, or they're just try to hold that funding because the timeline is over 10 years. And so that is a little bit concerning to me. If they want to use right away, we don't have too much. Based on the calculation in the report, it's only 650,000 left and per year, and that is net income. And so right now, if we're talking about 10 years long length, and maybe you can explain that a little bit more. So it's maybe quicker. I try to understand it's quicker to use the budget process than just hold the new reserve fund.
So Councillor Rice, I'll maybe start and the team can layer in. So I don't know if one is more expedient than the other. The creating a reserve will not collect enough funds to do all of the improvements that are needed over the entire process. So the traditional budget process will be needed to allocate funds for the improvements. What this reserve will do will help with, could help with how people perceive the parking when they pay in that particular area, that those funds are staying in that particular neighborhood. It also then creates a opportunity for funding some of the initial steps to all of the improvements that are needed, like some of the studies and planning and design work could potentially be funded out of the reserve earlier than the capital, but the traditional budget process is going to be needed with either option.
But the people pay parking in that area and it's come across entire city. The city-wide customers come to use that parking. It's not just local. And also the budget process for the 2027, 2030, and it will start very quickly. And then for me to look at the timeline here, so my time is out. I can come back later.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. So going back to the public market, the report says that the sales should be focused on heritage preservation rather than the revenue generation for the reserve fund. So how can we, I guess, better preserve that heritage? When you stated something about it's the oldest one in Alberta, that made me think of the mosque that has the oldest mosque that was transferred over to Fort Edmonton. Is that something that could be done with this building, or does it have to stay in place?
Heritage best practice would keep buildings where they are located.
Okay.
Yeah, and just in terms of sale, maybe Mr. Jiraki wants to jump in.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so on that specific property, we have listed it currently. Through our listing, we've identified that we are strongly encouraging preservation of the building. We haven't outline that it must be designated. However, we're looking for proposals that could actually address that and see what individuals are able to do. The reason why we haven't specifically outlined that it must be designated is because as it's currently a city asset, we want to ensure that we are not creating a situation where we obligate ourselves to invest in a building wherein right now we don't have a municipal use for it. And so ideally, we're hoping to attract some type of investor who can look at preserving the building and also take it over through sale. And so if we can condition that in a land sale agreement, we would. We've been successful in that for other properties, but we're currently in the process of waiting for bids to still be submitted.
Okay, but is there anything, like, okay, so I understand that's your intent, is to preserve over, I guess, getting a higher price for it. But is there anything, like, would a motion to ensure that it is preserved? Would that be considered?
Ultimately, it's up to council, but I would just like that we are currently out for market based on some of the language. So if there is a change, then we would likely need to pull back from that process and take a different step and maybe provide some more of the implications associated with designating it while the city continues to maintain the asset.
Because I think just down the street, there was the St. Anthony's School that was also sort of with the developer's intent was to preserve that school in their overall development. So is that something that would be considered in this case then? Is that if they are sort of either maybe keeping the exterior, the facade, the...
Yes, so that's what we're hoping to see proponents submit offers on and to outline that within their offers. We're just leaving it open-ended in the sense of allowing an individual to review what is possible and feasible for them, but we are encouraging preservation of the building where possible.
Okay, encouraging but not... Okay, I might have a motion for that then. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stevenson.
Oh, thank you. I was waiting to ask questions about a motion that might be going on. So I can just wait if you want to do that?
If you would be so kind, yes, I'll introduce the students if we're done with questions. Does anybody else have questions of administration? Hearing none, then I'll put my motion on next once we introduce our guests. As they are all seated, it is our honor to welcome the undergraduate students from Our Lady of the Prairies University. They are from Ward CP Winniwalk, and their professor is Professor Lucas. It's not noon yet, so we can still make April Fool's jokes. Are you grade 4 students? Grade 6 students. Welcome, welcome. Okay, so not quite university yet. And Our Lady of the Prairies, is that correct? Well, welcome here. And York City Councillor for Ward CP Winniwalk is Councillor Sarah Hamilton, who's not on this committee. What you're watching is a committee meeting today, so all of the councillors are divided up onto different committees. So she's not with us today, but sometimes other councillors come in via screen and visit. So welcome, enjoy your tour, enjoy City Hall, walk around Churchill Square. It's very beautiful today. And let's give them a round of applause and welcome them to the chambers. And so feel free to stay, or we might see you over the lunch break. So if I may take the floor, I'm going to put a motion on the floor, and I'll look to the clerks to confirm the wording. But I would like to move that administration establish a reserve fund to dedicate net parking revenues and net land sale proceeds from properties identified within the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy to support design and or construction of amenities identified in the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy as outlined in the April 1st, 2025 Urban Planning and Economy Report UPE 02727. So very quickly to introduce, this is a two-part as we heard about, in order to fund the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy. There is no other funding available. There's no other stream. This is also new money. This is new money from the parking lot, new money from the land sales. It was not revenue we were expecting, and it's going to provide critical amenities in the area. It also will help for folks who are either concerned about some of the land sales or concerned about changes to parking or concerned about just growth in the area. it's not what you take away, it's what you leave behind, and this would provide much needed resources to help advance this work and bring it forward. It aligns with curbside strategy, it aligns with the public realm strategy, it aligns with basically helping put some of our plans that we have passed into action, and I would urge you to support it. And if you're not sure at the moment about it, we can always divide the question and we can just agree today on the parking revenues that should be allocated, which I think there is a bit of urgency for it, given there's change around that parking lot. And I would very much sooner than later like to say where that money's going. And we can always, if you were hesitant, though you shouldn't be, and you should support it outright, but the land sale, we can always, if that's something that there's some consternation around, we could talk about that later too. But I hope this is something that we can pass today and then recommend up to City Council. So that's my introduction. Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Councillor Jans. So I just want to go back to the question I think that was asked probably by Councillor Stevenson. I've forgotten who's asked it, around the work that's happening in the curbside management. We've said the benefit agreement, or the whatever it was, parking benefit districts, that work hasn't started. When would that work? Like, sorry, I might have missed when that was planning on getting started.
It's not starting in the next couple of years. It would be beyond that as we work through some of the details of the financial aspects of it, for sure.
So just to clarify, like, do we envision something that would be coming to the next council in advance of them setting the next 4-year budget, where that would likely, no?
No, it wouldn't be in advance of the next 4-year budget.
Okay. Is there, I'm just curious, is there a reason why? Like, I guess, like, to me, if it doesn't happen at the start of the next 4-year budget cycle, it's not probably happening till 2030.
The curbside management, that element of it is, we would need to work through the financial, internally, how do we want to spend our money? And I think maybe the maturity of the city, as we become a bigger city, there's more parking pressures, it becomes more obvious that this is a good answer. But at this point, there isn't, I think, it isn't the right time, given our financial situation and parking revenues and our financial policies.
So the reason I'm asking these questions is that I like the idea. What I'm worried about is the signal I'm sending to, and I appreciate Stony Plain Road as an example, does not yet have parking meters. It's almost certainly going to happen in the next 4-year budget cycle, and we're doing that. You know, we've been expanding this option, and I think we're seeing, well, I think right now we're seeing a perception of parking issues across the city. I'm not sure that is really the case in most communities yet. Nevertheless, I'm just wondering. So I want to support this, but I also want to be able to then say we're actually going to be starting that work in a more timely manner. And to me, my feeling would be, because of the growth of the city, because of the evolution of what we're seeing now, I feel like the right time. I just don't know I don't know how you make that change midway through a budget cycle. Yes, we always have the supplemental pieces, but it just feels very messy. And I mean, my gut says it's not going to happen if we don't do it. If we don't do it at the beginning of this next budget cycle, it's not happening until the 2031 budget. So is there a way, if I were to approve this, if I were to support this recommendation to council, that when this comes to council, we could consider making a motion saying that work be done in advance of the start of the next, as part of the next budget deliberation, the next 4-year budget deliberation?
Councillor, you could certainly make a motion to start the work. I can't imagine that it could be done that quickly, though.
Okay.
Because we're starting the capital budget in less than a year from now in terms of preparation, but we could start laying the groundwork of having those conversations.
Okay, yeah, I guess, and again, you know, I'm starting from a place of ignorance here, is that, you know, I realize Calgary has had this for a while. You know, I don't want to oversimplify it in my brain, but in my head, my thinking was, we take the model from Calgary, we say this is generally going to apply, we understand the financial impacts, and then the next council during the setting of the 4-year budget deliberation already has a model. They just need to understand the financial impacts. So that's my oversimplification of what is likely always complex work. So okay, so I'll think about that, because this would have to go to council. So we could likely make a motion then to signal that we might have that conversation citywide, but okay, all right. I think
Councillor, if I
that's-
can just add to that real quick, not to take too much time, but yeah, I think you're right there. I think it's those broader financial impacts and
Yeah.
the broader community that we have to understand. So Calgary's done it. We probably want to talk with them to see like what the results of that are. So not saying it's not a good idea, just something we need a lot more time to explore,
Exactly.
I would say.
I wouldn't want to rush it, but at the same time,
Yes.
I'm aware of I feel like I'm putting a lot of pressure on the 4-year budget, but there is a lot of pressure on that 4-year
There,
budget, and
100%,
I
yeah.
don't, I think
Yeah.
we should have, if we're gonna have these conversations, let's have it when it's the right time, so.
Which is kind of what we're saying in the report is like, until we have that wholesome, well thought out discussion, carry on with the regular process, like unfunded service packages, bring those forward and have that discussion during the supplemental budgets.
And this
through,
one.
through the normal budget process.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm a little, I fear I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I do have some questions. So the strategy and for the OSPRS strategy presented October 2024. So what is the timeline for the implementation?
So it is, depending on capital budget or budget process, when budget is available, because the strategy comprised not just what the areas we're talking about now, but also the bus rapid transit corridor along White Avenue. And some of what we talked about at committee last fall was that if we're taking away parking in this particular neighborhood, we need to make sure there's other modes of transportation, like enhanced bus service. So there is linkages to the mass transit corridor along White Avenue. And so the full extent could be approximately a decade out, but it could stretch longer than that as well.
So I heard, and then for many, I know there's several actions outlined in the strategy. For many actions, we cannot just happen quickly. So I heard very clearly, and so that's also based on the capital budget process. And then I understand that White Avenue is an important area for our city. But I try to thinking about what is a better way to address that priority growth and to use our capital budget properly. And instead of, right now we're going to do the reserve fund. So maybe you can tell me something about the reserve fund. What are our city's financial standardized process to create a new reserve fund? And then who is responsible for that? And how we can use that fund? Is there any limitation? And who is going to approve the reserve fund use and compared to the budget? And because this strategy is not the small piece, if we're going to implement the decade time, so I think that is a big topic in the capital budget. And instead of we put a little bit of money here over 10 years net revenue. So I'm a little bit confused and for the motion put on the floor here. So maybe
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I'll start at least. So Councillor Rice, you're like the reserves. So you have a reserve and equity policy. That's a council policy. Council approves all reserves, their purpose, what goes into the reserve, and how the money gets spent out of the reserve. So that's all something that council will approve. So we'd probably bring back a reserve policy or a reserve strategy that would discuss how this reserve would work. So this doesn't align with your reserve policy right now. Like I mentioned before, the reserve policy is for larger programs or initiatives that are long term, and multiple millions of dollars is usually what we have in the reserve. So nothing this small. So this would be new, and I would say the risk of it is setting a precedent for similar reserves like this to be established.
okay, thank you for that is really helpful. And also, even though it's aligned with other type of strategy, but it's my understanding. So you can confirm that is correct. And for other strategy and like curbside strategy, but we do not set up the funding specific like the reserve fund, and we actually use the general budget process, like you mentioned. And it's not, oh, this area, we put the reserve fund for this area specific. So we are just the general revenue and use it for citywide
Correct,
purpose.
100%. So typically what would happen with something like this is a unfunded service package would come forward for a funding request funded through general revenues or available budget. That's
So this
typically
is
the way it's
actually contradictory with our budget process and then with the other type of policy as well. That's what I heard. Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. And if I can jump on quickly, if you don't mind. I guess to administration. So I hear the hesitancy about the land, but the parking is completely new revenue. Like, what can we do right now, even if we don't want to talk about setting up a reserve? Is like, what is the minimal next step we can do to support keeping that revenue from the parking lot in the area?
So I can start. So what will happen is when this parking revenue gets to be generated, we will add it to the budget. So we'll bring forward a supplemental budget where you'll see the revenue coming in. One option is at that time to bring forward an unfunded service package and request funding for the preliminary design work or whatever needs to be funded. You could do it that way. Again, it wouldn't be saying take this parking revenue and use it for this. We would add the parking revenue to the budget. It's open to everyone. And then you could bring forward an unfunded service package for this request, and council at that time could decide if this is a priority that they want to fund.
So there's no way right now that we can create like a designated, the funding will be earmarked for like Old Strathcona renewal or Old Strathcona upkeep grant or whatever. There's no way we can just divert it right now, that all revenues from the farmers market go, or the old lot go here.
I would advise against something like that. You could make a motion for an unfunded service package to be brought back for discussion in the fall SOBA or something like that.
So what is the next soonest point we could talk about this then? The spring?
The fall supplemental.
Not the spring budget.
In the spring budget, we're not making these type of budget adjustments. It's called the tax levy confirmation report now.
That's it. There's no other adjustments.
Very few adjustments.
Okay. Okay, I'll go on with the committee list. So, Councillor, I guess Councillor Wright.
So the amount that we'll receive from this revenue is really minimal compared with any other budgetary concerns that we have, right? You like you said that it wouldn't help support the impacts of the tariffs or.
Yes, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll rephrase that. So, I mean, every penny counts. So I don't want to minimize anything.
Right.
I'm just saying if you're looking to make a decision today what to do with these funds, like it could help with anything. Tariffs, when those happen, like we're still going through that could be a really impactful thing. We're just not too sure what that would be right now. So I was trying to say that you can make the decision separately if you wanted to.
Okay, and overall to the public realm strategy, minimal impact, better to look at it at the whole, the next budget cycle?
In terms of advancing the strategy, wouldn't suggest it's a minimal impact. It could help set aside and reserve funding dollars for commencing the prelim design and some of the planning conceptual work, perhaps a little bit earlier than the big funding package that would be needed. So it may help with timing, but in the full extent of actually seeing change on the ground for Edmontonians, this would not adjust the timeline for what we would need, or the timeline for actual change in the community.
So those people that are paying for parking over the next year while at the farmer's market won't see any impact of their dollars on the ground in any
The
short term.
intention from admin is that these funds would be very helpful in doing some of the planning and design work, and so that means paper exercises rather than tangible results Edmontonians would see tomorrow.
Okay, because I think that was one of the items that the speakers were talking about, is that people would see tangible changes in the neighborhood.
So, Councillor, this though, that answer is just isolated to this particular area. If we had other parking benefit districts across the city, those needs might be different, and they may go to hard infrastructure needed the next week or the next year. So that answer is just in isolation to the need of this particular area.
Okay, and like I think where Councillor Knack talked about Stony Plain Road. You might see some changes there if that came into play. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. So just with the way this motion currently stands, again, it would just be the net parking revenues from that specific lot, not for all e-park in the area? Yeah, I'm seeing a nod. Okay. And then I guess I do have some hesitation. So I think the logic of a parking benefit area is set out in our curbside management strategy. So there's logic, that's a direction that we're headed. Yes, this is maybe moving ahead a bit faster in one area, but again, with a potential subsequent motion or a point to this motion, for me that makes sense. There's alignment. I think where I'm struggling with the land sales is that doesn't seem to be a direction that we're headed overall. Is that correct? Like that's not an approach that we're looking at more broadly in our land enterprise work.
That is correct. Yeah, we don't typically divert revenue for specific reserves. It flows through to general revenue as well as into a portion of land enterprise retained earnings as well.
Yeah, and what is the scale of the value? I'm not sure if you can answer that, but at a high level.
So is that related to we'll call it the Ritchie Mill parking lot for clarity?
Sure.
Okay. So at a high level, and this is maybe just an order of magnitude at this point in time, we have had the site appraised, so we'd roughly state around $5 million. The thing that does still need to be considered is that there are likely some contamination items that need to be worked through, and that will have an impact on value as well, depending on the extent of the site conditions.
Okay. And then, so what would that mean just in terms of impacts to land enterprise for retained earnings? So this is part of your inventory. Again, presumably you're anticipating those earnings to come to land enterprise.
Right, so with each budget cycle, we do identify specific parcels that we're looking to dispose of. And so from that, we would make our own projections around what we can expend on other projects that we're working on, ensuring that we have an ongoing funding stream related to the sales that we've projected. So if we run into a scenario where we are creating, let's just say, multiple reserves using land sale revenue, that does have an impact on the work that we do, say, on exhibition lands or other projects, as we would be limiting some of the funding that we're using for that purpose.
Right. Okay, well, I think I'm not on committee, but recognizing this is a recommendation to City Council, I think for me, I would hope to potentially strike the net land sales proceeds, but I open to what other committee colleagues have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Councillor Jan. And sorry, I've been trying to both write a subsequent and listen intently and try to do both. That's always a terrible idea. So to clarify, the new parking revenues for this new lot started today? No, when are they starting?
April the 6th, just later this week.
Okay, so within a few days. All right, sorry. That is currently factored into our 2025 budget. You have already created a line item assuming that money is coming in. Did we build that as part of what we approved in December? Did that assume this money?
Not that I'm aware of, but finance can confirm.
Yeah, I'm just looking back to.
Yeah, let me look into that. I didn't think they were. I thought that'd be something we'd add through the fall supplemental, but I will double check and get back to you.
And that's an important, because I think in my mind, if it's not built into what we approved, then I even more feel like I'm okay with advancing the parking piece now and advancing that conversation, because it wouldn't, in my mind, I don't think that would require a separate budget motion, because this is truly new money in that regards. Okay, so I don't think I have any more questions. Maybe I'll ask one while you're seeing if you can get an answer on that. I have heard to the mover some hesitation about the land piece, and while I'm intrigued in that conversation, I'm worried this is muddying a potential. I think we should. The parking piece feels a lot more reasonable to have that conversation. I might be interested in the land piece as well, but I'm just worried we might want to separate out that conversation. So, have you thought if you want to leave that piece in the motion in the short term?
If you were to move to remove that in the short term, given what I'm hearing from committee, I would not object.
Okay, I think maybe I will move that, just appreciating that we shouldn't not have the conversation, but might not be right today so that we don't lose the two.
Yeah, I don't want it to fail and then I can't bring it back.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so it would read that administration established a reserve fund to dedicate net parking revenue net parking revenue to support the Old Strathcona Public Realm Strategy, ... So it remove reference to land sale for now.
Correct. That would be my motion unless it's considered friendly by our committee colleagues.
I don't think there's any objections. No, okay, hearing none. So land is out, parking remains.
Okay.
Any other, you have the floor.
That gave us a good minute to see if there was any answer on the financial side.
I'm still confirming.
That's okay. Okay. All right. I'm going to assume that is the case for now, and if you hear otherwise, please interject that it's currently not there. So, okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you. I'll wait to speak to it.
Councillor Wright.
Hi, just looking for a little specificity. So will it then read the net parking revenues from lot such and such? Like I don't want all the parking revenues from across the city?
No, I understand. I think it's about that area, so I'll look to admin how to write it in a way that they understand it. Although I'm open to taking all the parking revenue from across the city, you make a strong point, Councillor Wright. So,
well, no, I'll take everything else south of the river, and we can put benches in Spomatapi. Okay.
Can I look to administration to clarify what wording do you require to enact the intention verbalized?
Yeah, you could definitely add from the new e-park lot, where the former Old Strathcona Farmers Market parking lot was, something like that.
We don't, yeah, okay, I'll look to the clerks if we have a specific lot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something. Okay, anything else, Councillor Wright? We'll get the rewording going. Okay, Councillor Rice.
Question to finance. So my understanding is doesn't matter this new revenue is a part of approved 2025 revenue budget, or 2025-6 budget.
That's correct. So Councillor Knight confirmed it's not in the budget right now.
So if it's not, but it doesn't matter for our general revenue. If we start April 6th to collect revenue, parking revenue, but this as our standards practice, this go to general revenue.
100% correct.
Yeah, still this is still the contribution to the 2025 and 2026 for this budget cycle. And so if we set this aside as a reserve fund, that means we have to use the other tax levy to offset the gap there. And because the revenue, if the revenue is decreased more, that means the results could be tax levy or tax rate increased more, generally speaking, citywide.
100% correct. So what we would have done is we would have brought this forward in the fall supplemental budget adjustment as an additional revenue, which would have offset the tax levy increase required in 2026. Yes. If this is passed by council, that would flow directly to a reserve, therefore increasing your tax levy need for 2026.
Okay. So you mentioned another point about this should be instead of set up the reserve fund, and it should be the unfunded service package. And if we want to fund it some work in advance for the study paper exercises.
Yeah, so to be clear, this goes against how we use reserves. It goes against our reserve policy. So even when we go to council with this, we might need to ask for an exception to the reserve policy to do this. We would have to establish a reserve for this, and that would have to be approved by council as well and how it's used. So I was just suggesting another option would be to follow the normal budget process, which is to bring forward an unfunded service package for something like this to fund out of your budget.
Okay, thank you for that piece. And then back to to the planning team. And then our city have so many priorities. Is that paper exercise at this moment, is it time sensitive, is it urgent? If we're give the factor to consider the implement these strategies as decades and not that many years long. And why we need to do that right now?
Councillor, just a clarification. Are you looking for the priority in terms of the parking benefit district citywide, or starting this work for this particular neighborhood?
Starting this work, because I heard this is more like the paper exercise to provide this a little bit additional funding right now. And then in this budget cycle, instead of waiting for the next budget cycle to prioritize and to follow. So why we need to do that right now? And then if give the project is like 12 years or even over 12 years, 15 years implementation period.
Correct, Councillor. Thank you for that. So it would take some time for if a reserve was created to build up enough funds to actually start the design work. So it wouldn't be something that happens in the short term, the work on that. We would need the reserve to build up so that there would be enough funds to adequately start that design work. So it wouldn't be an immediate priority adjustment.
Okay, so it's not the priority at this moment. Also, do you have the specific the funding amount, say how much money we need, and for the concept, we already finished the planning, we got the strategy, and then how much money we need for the design, and then I don't think we have that information yet. Do we?
I don't believe we do have that information scoped
Councillor,
out.
the idea of starting some of the high level work is to provide some cost estimates. We don't have.
So you don't have that cost estimate?
No, but we wouldn't be able to provide that to you without some additional work. So this dollars would be to go towards some of that additional work. And I think in addition to why would you want to do it now, part of it is kind of what Old Strathcona talked about, the momentum of knowing that something is happening. So that, yeah, there's parking costs, but something is happening in the area. It's going towards some future planning to how do we improve this area. So some of it's perception.
Yeah, perception and concept.
But we do need to do some planning in order to get some of those details in order to tell you, well, what would it cost? You know,
So,
the PDDM process, need to go through that.
So if that is the case, based on our city's normal process, then we should collect information and bring reports back, say, this is the funding we needed. And for starting the design, to start the study, or the business case or anything like that. So right now, without all those information, we just say, let's put the funding there and to reduce our general revenue. I think that is concerning. And we don't have this information there. Even say, we should have the information and then this is the funding we request to start those paper exercise. So I think that step and in the process is missing here, if I can say that. I think that's all my question. Thank you.
Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thanks. I've been listening to this conversation. I wanted to ask administration a question about the intersect with the curbside management strategy. So while this conversation was going on, and as referenced by Councillor Stevenson, says that there's actions in the curbside strategy that align with this motion, even though it's fast tracking it. But I'm reading the actions, and what action specific do you know what action she is talking about?
I thought it was action 5, but I'd have to look up as well.
Correct, it is action 5, Councillor.
Parking benefit districts?
Yeah, that, and the action is labeled not as a go do it, it is go explore opportunities and potential strategies for implementing parking benefit districts across the city so that similar neighborhoods that have similar opportunities could benefit from this approach to funding.
Yeah, well, this is so, and it's counter to our current policy. Because it also talks about in the curbside management strategy with Action 1 that there may be amendments to City of Edmonton policies, guidelines, or bylaws in relation to this work.
Yes, that is correct.
But this is not contemplated in terms of our financial strategy, like our reserve funding policy. Like that, when we talked about those policies, was this one contemplated?
So I think Councillor Rutherford, this is Harm speaking from Financial Services.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I would, like if we're exploring Action 5 out of the curbside management strategy, we would be re-looking at our budget policies and our reserve policies. So those would be two.
So what's the timeline for Action 5? As per the actual curbside strategy to explore
Councillor,
that.
we don't have it on our work plan at the moment. So it is a future action.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things that I worry about, so we've talked a lot as a city about like equity, and like there are no paid parking options in several wards. So if we create something like this, and if we, like you said, this is setting a precedent today. This is why I'm bringing this up. I've already heard other councillors talking about wanting it in their wards. Does it divert general revenue to specific ward areas rather than, like, for example, I even think about Action 6, which talks about, you know, making improvements for people with disabilities and accessibility. Like, I wonder, is this in alignment with an equity lens? I don't know the answer because I flip-flop because I hear the speakers from Strathcona, and it is an area that, you know, could really benefit from this. So like I'm flip-flopping in my own mind, but I also would be remiss to not bring up these tensions.
I think, Councillor, that's a very good observation, and something that we would want to explore and feel very comfortable with the equity trade-offs if there were some. And
Yeah.
there do appear to be some, because not all neighborhoods in our city have the same opportunities or city assets or parking opportunities, revenue. So there would be anticipated differences, and we need
Or
to,
just even within the curbside management strategy, if there is revenue generated from parking, do we want it to fund district improvements, or do we want it to fund like accessibility is another thing I think about, like even citywide?
correct. Yes, there's a lot to explore with changing the system of funding improvements.
And can I just ask one other question to Harm? We're not out of the red yet, are we? Like when we talk about that this isn't budgeted, it's not new money, but we also faced a $700,000 deficit in 2024, right? And we could potentially have a deficit in 2025.
Completely correct.
Hey, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Oh, I have a question, but it doesn't relate to the motion, but it's in regards to a subsequent that I might make.
Why don't you ask it now for expediency?
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
And then we'll determine if it's on order or
Okay,
not. Yeah.
so I was thinking of doing a subsequent to confirm the preservation of that, the public market. Do I need to? What assurance can you give me that you will consider the preservation of that building?
So we're definitely considering it. That's what we had put into the listing. So that's going to be a primary component of our review. When we review any of the proposals that come in, we're doing so with the heritage team at the table as well to make sure that we collectively make a decision on it. What we can also do though is bring back a report to executive committee, for instance, seeking approval for any land sale before we actually enter into the agreement. So that would give committee an opportunity to see what proposals have come forward before we sign or commit anything as administration.
Okay, and that will be done without any motion or direction from committee or council?
Yeah, if it's the will of committee, we're happy to bring that back. We do anticipate it'll be within our delegated authority, but we can definitely bring a report back if that's what's desired.
Okay, without me having to make a motion?
Yep.
Okay, perfect, thank you, that's all I have.
Is that a memo or a report?
Well, he said a report to exec.
We can do a report just so that we don't sign any agreement before we review all those proponents that come forward and the proposals that come forward, and allow council to see what's been presented and what level of heritage preservation will exist at that time.
Because it's not a condition of the sale, it's just a...
Correct.
Okay, something indicated in there. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hearing no further speakers, we're at the motion. Just looking to the clerk that this is suitable wording. Admin is okay with that? Okay. Then anyone to speak to it? Please wave if you're silent, Councillor Knack.
Thanks. This is a recommendation of council, so I also appreciate we can probably be finished before lunch. So I'll say this. Lots of great questions about whether we should be going down a, what does this impact? Does this open up the slippery slope argument? What does this mean for the citywide piece? Here's how I'm looking at this. Because this is a new piece of revenue that wasn't captured in the budget for 2025, I think it's worth us looking at this, because if we're going to have the citywide conversation, which I would like to do a subsequent motion that says let's do that as part of the next budget deliberation, the next 4-year budget piece, I'd actually really like to see how this could work. And I know Calgary's doing it, and I think it's working well there, but we could get more information. I'm purely making an assumption at this point. I don't have any hard data, but I always love to do pilots. In a way, I'm going to treat this like a pilot and say, let's get that analysis. Let's see how this works. I think in particular because of this lot and the fact that we're charging folks to now show up on Saturday for the farmers market, maybe that can help them alleviate some of that pain and say, hey, we're trying something out here. Your money is going to go to further improvements for this area. And if it works, I would like to see it expanded citywide. I think there's the next budget, we're not going to have money to do giant mega projects. But if we can have a lot of smaller dollars set aside for different areas, especially on our main streets and our business improvement areas, and I appreciate not all business improvement areas have paid parking yet, including Stony Plain Road, but I think that's likely going to come as our city continues to evolve. So I would ask committee to say, look at this as a pilot. Doesn't, I realize, say the word pilot, but it's a pilot because there's an end date. There will be a park in this space at some point. So this actually does end. That can use that data. Let us do a citywide conversation through a subsequent motion to have that bigger question. But why not do both? Give us both some localized data to see how this works while we do the bigger conversation, answering the big questions that I think many of our colleagues have raised today that are very valid about slippery slope. Is it investing in the right areas? You name it. What about areas that don't have BIAs? Looking at Councillor Wright. What about areas, I don't know if Councillor Rice has BIAs. So what does that mean for those areas that don't have this and wouldn't be able to tap in? Again, let's have that bigger conversation as part of a subsequent. So I'm going to support this and put forward a subsequent to say let's have the bigger conversation, or at least let the next council have the bigger conversation as part of their next 4-year budget deliberation, using this to inform that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, thank you. Very briefly, just wanted to thank the mover for bringing this forward. I think as highlighted, Strathcona is a really important part of our city. I will be the first to admit that we do spend a lot of time talking about the downtown, and we spend a lot of time investing in the downtown, which is important, and I truly believe it's a benefit to all Edmontonians. But I think White Ave also plays a really central role in our city as a whole, both for visitors and residents. It's critical to our economy and to our community as a whole. So I think the mover has found a really creative way to fund this essential investment in this really critical area. As highlighted by Councillor Knack, this is a really unique funding source in that it's coming, it hasn't been budgeted for, and we know it's going away. So I think trying something new in terms of capturing that for this important work in the public realm strategy is really a great approach, and I think actually provides a bit more stability in our overall budgeting, so it's not feast and famine with this new revenue coming up. I'm going to speak in advance to a subsequent I'm anticipating coming, just to not have to speak twice. But I of course know for many of the BIAs and communities that I represent the desire to see parking benefit areas. That's something that there's a strong desire for, and something that I think is really important that we consider and accelerate that conversation in advance of the 4-year budget coming up. I think, to the points around equity, I agree. I think it's very important to understand the full costs of curbside management. So even though curbside parking might be located in a certain area of the city, all taxpayers pay for the enforcement of that, for the snow clearing of those streets, for the road renewal of those streets. And so I think it's important for that parking revenue to help offset some of those costs that are borne by all Edmonton taxpayers. At the same time, the presence of ePark and the busyness of those areas also does impact locally. And so keeping some of that revenue, I would say the net revenue in the area to provide those focused investments and build off the strengths of areas that are already seeing investment and vibrancy, I think is a great city building strategy. So I preemptively thank the potential subsequent mover for bringing that forward, and again, thank the mover of this motion, which I think is really positive. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright says she doesn't need to speak, so she's removing her name. I have nothing further to add except that by removing the land sale piece, we can continue that conversation. Had it failed today, I'm just telling our guests, had it failed today, I wouldn't be able to bring it back for a calendar year. So this buys us time for a little more flexibility there. Hearing nothing further, please call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried with Councillor Wright in opposition. Are there any subsequent motions to this item, Councillor Knack?
Yes. So that I'll move that as part of the next 4-year budget cycle, that administration explore opportunities for parking benefit districts, which would allow the city to reinvest parking fee revenues back into the area from where they were charged to facilitate local improvements. These local improvements could include things like enhanced sidewalks, secure bicycle parking, and local amenities like benches, lighting, plants, trees, and public art. Due date, Q4 2026, or yeah, better due date, the 2027 to 2030 council budget deliberations. Just very quickly, as an introduction, I pulled the wording literally from the website of the city spot that lists that, so that's where the language came from. And so I'm just changing it. Instead of the current timeline under the next steps on the website, which says a timeline has not been finalized, I have now put in a timeline. But the language is word for word. I have plagiarized it from the website, but I've given my citation now, so that's why we're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just confirm with administration that this motion is in order?
Yes, and I would suggest that, we are going to, it's probably going to be a first level. It's not going to be all sorted out, but I think the big thing is, collectively across the administration and with finance, kind of getting that, well, what does this look like? And so it would be a strategic level. It's not going to be a program. We just couldn't do that fast, but I think we can put something together to give you an indication, what does this look like, and do you want to move forward to the next steps?
Okay, I'm hearing understanding from the mover there. I guess there's harmony, so Councillor Rutherford. Oh wait, Councillor Rice.
The question to the mover, also to the administration, and if this motion passed, how that impacts our city's general revenue policy and then also the budget process, because I'm really concerned about this.
Yeah, so the answer to the question is this motion will answer that question. So we heard general revenue currently includes things like parking revenues. This would allow us to say by how much, if we were to change that, if the next council during budget deliberations wanted to change it, then they would have the financial data to help inform that decision. But we need them to do the analysis so that the next council can actually answer that question.
But for the wording on the floor right now does not provide that indication. They will come back with how much revenue will be included. And so actually I have a few questions related. That means we're going to change the policy, or we're going to change policy for the budget deliberation. Because usually, and for this type of work, like enhanced sidewalks, source bike lane park, local amenities, benches, lighting, plants, trees, public arts, all this type of things is covered under different budget source. So with different priority decision determination process, if we're going to look at all those tons of things, I'm really concerned about that is conflicting with our city's general budget prioritizing process.
So yeah, the way I'm reading this motion is, we would come back and we would explain what the impacts of starting something like this would be on all those items. So for example, public art, there's a reserve established for that right now. We talk about that a bit. Lighting, benches, and plants. So yeah, we would try to clarify as much as we could what the impacts would be for something like this to the budget process.
Because to me, this is fundamental, the principle change for the budget process. So if this is for the next budget, for the next council, why you are doing right now?
Short answer is, if we don't give direction, they won't come forward with any conversation on it. So if we want to have this conversation, which was identified in the curbside management strategy, this just gives direction as to the timeline for when that conversation should happen. Because right now, if we don't provide direction, it's not coming in advance of this budget.
But for the scope, including this motion already, I have different conversation, different strategies, different process in place already. And this, to me, this is repeat certain conversation, certain work already in place, and based on the scope here.
During the discussion on when we heard questions, is that work isn't starting right now. So at some point the work would start. This motion says make sure the work starts in advance of the next budget deliberations. If this doesn't pass, that work will start, but it'll probably happen in 2027, 2028, something like that. I just wanted to give a timeline for when that work should start, so that if there is a desire for the next council to make any changes, they actually are informed as to what those impacts would be.
And also the motion did not include, there are so many areas, because we only have BAS area, 13 BAS, and then concentrated in certain area. And the majority of the city's area does not have that. And so for those areas, all community amenities improvement, those listed in the motion, and what do you say the implication on the improvement in those areas without BIAs?
So this isn't specific to BIAs. So it just so happens that most of our parking, paid parking, is in BIA areas. But if there's an expansion of paid parking into other parts of the city, into other areas that aren't BIAs, this would be applicable to any spot where the city would be considering paid parking.
So if there's many areas no paid parking, and then I know many areas there is no paid parking there.
Yeah, most wards don't have any paid parking right now.
Yeah, to me this is really focused on this certain area and is not look at their city-wide pieces. So I'm going to open to look at what my colleagues say about that.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I to the mover, I think I'm going to pick up on I think the sequencing of this motion is off, because as I read it, it's saying bring back a conversation on this to the budget, but budget deliberations are about dollars and numbers. So wouldn't you actually want this report to come back in, let's say, Q2 of 2026, that then could say provide an unfunded service package to the budget and or any amendments to policy that need to be made at the budget deliberations? I feel like we've missed, I feel like there's a step that's missing in this.
Yeah, I like that thought, because if it is going to be a strategy conversation first, which we heard, that might make more sense for the due date to be Q2 or Q3 of 2026 to then be allowed to inform that. So I think that's a
And then,
great flag.
yeah, and then you're
Great
right, like
flag.
the motions would come out of that say either unfunded service package for parking benefit districts and or policy amendments that could all come back at the budget deliberations.
Love that. That seems very thoughtful, and appreciate you flagging that.
Oh, I guess, yeah, to amend it then, the due date, but also just remove as part of the budget cycle, just say that administration explore opportunities.
I would,
If that's considered friendly I'm not on committee, so I'm just making suggestions right now.
if one of my committee colleagues wants to make that as a motion, as a friendly amendment, I think it's a great idea.
I can do that.
Okay, Councillor Rice did just do the aforementioned.
Yes, and then we can just change the wording there.
Okay,
Yeah.
wording.
Okay. Because I think this is a really important conversation. I just want to make sure it's sequenced well. Thank you for that indulgence from the committee. Can I just ask the question to admin, based on the new sort of friendly amended motion, if this comes back, will you also be able to include in that report some of the operating impacts of capital? Because what I could kind of also see as being missed from this conversation is, okay, we create a district parking program that invests local improvements in, benches, plants, and then this is a dedicated reserve that goes to that. We add more park benches, we add more, then there's all of a sudden an operational cost that's absorbed into the general revenue budget, right? So I want to make sure we get that complete picture. Do you understand what I'm asking, and will that be incorporated into the report?
Councillor, understood, and definitely an important consideration, because it wouldn't have specific amounts of capital necessarily, but yes, we could comment on the expected impact to operating.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can also say, like, if you're adding, like, you have it at a general high level, I'm guessing, when you add benches, they come with an average annual maintenance cost of blah.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Yeah, I don't know if we would be able to get that specific, because we're not sure if it'll be benches or trees or sidewalks, but yes, we definitely we can comment on it for sure.
I think we
sorry, it's Caitlin Zarbeski. We have that maintenance cost for those items, so we'd be happy to provide those.
Yeah, so I just worried, like, because when we have this really important strategic conversation, I understand the principle right now is like, and my colleagues have mentioned it, right? Free parking is actually costing the city a lot of money. We're actually subsidizing a lot of road stuff. So I understand, parking fees help create revenue that then goes into the cost of maintenance and those things. But if we're diverting that money to a reserve, and then we're enhancing amenities, and that growth of those amenities comes with costs that we're not accounting for, we could actually be eroding our base budget. So I just want to make sure that that's at least a fulsome part of that conversation in this report coming back.
Yes, understood. Yes, we can do that, Councillor. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, there was a lag, so I apologize. That's perfect. Then that answers all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further speakers on the board, hearing the mover doesn't want to speak to close. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak to this or debate? Okay, Councillor Rice wants to speak to it.
You want me to sign? Before that, do we need to extend the order? Because already past 12 o'clock.
Clerk, do we need to extend orders?
We could unanimously extend orders.
Okay,
to complete this item, okay.
Yeah. We'll be very, very, very quick about this, and then I like I mentioned through my question, I do have the concern and for the motion and for the first put on the floor, just bring the conversation without a lot of information and missteps in. So right now, if we just explore opportunity and bring the report back, I'm open to have that opportunity explored and see how this could be and move forward or could be impact our 2 cents I want to mention here. One is a principle about our budget prioritizing process. And because that is the biggest one and for our city, how we determine the budget, how we determine the money dollars. So I would like that information to be there to prepare that change. Another one is about the one I would like to see this report come back, including the area. Actually, there is no paid parking area, but how those areas, sidewalks, community amenities, all those improvement and could be funded and could be prioritizing at the general revenue level, and instead of and then those revenue, this parking revenue goes to specific local area, and then other area impact other areas improvement. So I would like to see these 2 points to be included and in this opportunity and for the further conversation. So that's why I want to speak and I want to keep that in the public record. So right now I'm going to support this.
Thank you. Hearing no one else wishing to speak, we'll call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. Okay, that is carried unanimously. Any other subsequent motions? Nope. Responses to councillor inquiries, none. Private reports, none. Motions pending, none. Notice of motion and motions without customary notice, none. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time this morning.